With us, the director of the John Smith Centre and former Scottish Labour leader Kezia Dugdale, the national columnist Shona Craven, and STV's Westminster correspondent Catherine Sampson. Thank you all for joining us tonight. And the big COVID story this week has been the standoff between Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham. And is that clash between local and central government inevitable, do you think, Kezia?
Yes, I think it is, especially when you are in a situation now where the governments in Scotland and across the UK don't want to return to a national lockdown. They want to have localised solutions. And Andy Burnham's just saying that he understands the public health concerns of people in Greater Manchester, but the economic concern of so many people losing their jobs and their livelihoods is arguably as great. And he's asking for more money to protect the incomes of people that he represents in that area. We're in an odd position now where somehow there are only heroes or villains in this scenario. People would tell you that Andy Burnham wants to see more people die of COVID-19 whilst Boris Johnson is this big job wrecker. Of course, neither things are true. They're both elected politicians with mandates, looking at a set of facts and applying their judgment to them, which is what they're elected to do. It's incredibly difficult, but the reality, John, is it may all be too late. You've got a number of senior scientists, the social psychologist from the University of St Andrews, Stephen Riker in particular, saying this idea of a tiered system was great, but it's been bungled, and what we really need now is the national lockdown that Sage was arguing for almost a month ago now.
And of course, Shona, we had a similar situation in Scotland, did we not, with Aberdeen City Council and the Scottish Government, Aberdeen saying that they were treated too harshly.
Yeah, that was really interesting because I think on the day when I heard the headline news saying Aberdeen leaders, reject the extension of these measures, I thought, oh gosh, what's going to happen next? And then what happened next was the measures just continued, and it was a sort of symbolic gesture. Whereas what we've got now is this standoff. And unfortunately, the delay, I'm quite surprised that we're still in this position now on Monday, that nothing has been agreed. And when is this going to end? And as Kezia says, is Andy Burnham going to be portrayed as to blame for anything that happens next? I don't think that's fair. And I think there's been a lot of calls for greater support for extension of furlough, and we've not actually had that. And now the furlough is back. But it's less money, and it's legitimate to say people who are only on the minimum wage to begin with cannot afford to suddenly go down to 2/3. That's going to affect people's well-being in a very significant way too.
So how is this going to play out? Catherine, what's the sense at Westminster?
Yeah, I mean, well, the stalemate can't go on forever, and I think very much the sense is tomorrow is going to be decision day. Just in the last half hour or so, Robert Jenrick, the Community Secretary, has issued basically a kind of ultimatum, a deadline saying noon tomorrow, we want a decision agreed with you, or we're going to impose this anyway. And all the signs suggest there might be a Downing Street press conference coming tomorrow. So all of that leads me to think, these restrictions are coming into Greater Manchester, whether, perhaps Andy Burnham agrees to all the terms or not. And what has been interesting here, as Shona said, is how long this has gone on for. The dispute's been going for about a week. If they'd really wanted to, the UK government could have acted unilaterally probably at the start, but it is important to them to be seen to get the local leaders on board. Shared responsibility, yes. Shared blame, possibly.
And Kezia, how much of this is political posturing?
I personally don't think there is political posturing at play here. I think it's far too serious. We're in an emergency situation, an urgent situation. And like I said earlier, politicians are presented with advice from senior economic advisors, senior health advisors, and it's their job to weigh it up and apply their judgment to it. That's what they're elected to do. And I genuinely believe that the vast majority of our politicians are motivated by good reason. They want to do what is right. You've just got two different ideologies at play here. But the reality is it may all well be too late, and that a national lockdown is inevitable. That's what the scientists are saying now, that the tiered system is coming a bit too late, that the dark nights and winter approaching is going to make it harder and harder for people who are already fatigued by the rules to obey them. Seems very, very bleak.
And Shona, do you think, as Kezia is suggesting, that we could be heading for another national lockdown? Will people stick with it this time the way they did in the spring?
I'm not so sure about winter making things more difficult, because in a sense, with the shorter days and the colder nights, maybe there'll be less social mixing, in some ways people will just kind of cooree in and just accept that they're not going to see people until the end of the year. I think the national lockdown is always going to remain on the table, whether that's Scotland wide or UK wide. But I think I do understand the argument that some areas, their levels are much lower. But actually, if you look at Wales, its cases per 100,000 is, I believe, currently the lowest in the UK, and yet they have gone for this firebreaker lockdown. So, you can certainly see that there's different ways of interpreting the same situation, and there is this very difficult balance to strike.
And Catherine, very different situations in Scotland, as we've heard, in Wales, in Northern Ireland, in England. I mean, it is confusing, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, I was really struck by Wales today, actually. They've gone for this kind of short, sharp, basically full lockdown. And, it's been interesting watching Mark Drakeford's approach. Throughout this whole situation, it's really highlighted devolution very vividly. It's highlighted it to the national press in London, certainly, and to politicians in London, just what devolved leaders can do and the decisions they can make. Last week, Mark Drakeford in Wales was saying to people in high incident areas in England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, don't cross the border into Wales. Now, he's not a nationalist politician, he's a Labour politician when you talk about the politics of COVID. And the reaction to him, there was discontent in the UK government about what he was doing. But I think the reaction if Nicola Sturgeon started talking like that again, which she might do, would be very much stronger.
Well, it's all been very heavy and very serious so far. So let's something a wee bit brighter. So it's autumn, the reality TV shows are back in. We had Strictly Come Dancing, came back with the former Home Secretary, Jackie Smith. And how do we rate her chances, panel? What do we think? Anyway, Kezia, I'll go for you first.
Well, John, I spoke to Jackie Smith earlier today. We happened to be in the same meeting for something else, and I can tell you she's absolutely thrilled to be dancing with the king of the ballroom, Anton Dubek. But fans of Strictly will know that Anton rarely makes it past the first round, and I think he's had one final appearance in the whole history of the programme. But
yeah.
Jackie's motivations,
kiss of death, Kezia.
Jackie's motivations, I think, are really, really strong. She was saying to me tonight that she wants to demonstrate that women in their 50s can do amazing things, that they can start new adventures. And her, alongside Caroline Quentin, are determined to kind of showcase the very best of the slightly older women in the show.
And Shona, they're in a social bubble, and of course they've got the celebrity curse, or the Strictly curse. So the two of these could maybe come together.
Yeah, that's all they need, really. I mean, all this talk about people being paired up and then struck by the Strictly curse, and then they're pushed even closer together, and that's the only people they can see. So yeah, hopefully, it's horrible to think how everyone's sort of watching this, thinking, "Oh, is someone going to leave their husband?" So hopefully there won't be any of that. It can just be family entertainment that people can just all enjoy and talk about, and it gives people a distraction.
And Catherine, you're a fan.
I'm a big fan. I was delighted to see the glitter balls back on Saturday night. I'm not going to lie. I thought actually Jackie Smith, she's not a natural mover, is she? I think from what we saw on that programme, but personality matters in these shows. I mean, Ed Balls, for example, is no Fred Astaire, but look how far he got. And it is interesting to see how politicians, former politicians, they can sort of use these shows sometimes as a springboard to good things, to try and, create a better persona for themselves in the media, or perhaps to put their messages across. On the other hand, it can all go horribly wrong. No one wants to remember, George Galloway pretending to be a cat in Celebrity Big Brother, or any of these sort of disastrous things from the past. I'm sure, I don't know how Kezia feels about her time in the jungle, but it's a mixed bag, isn't it? It's always a big risk for anyone who's come out of that political bubble to sort of put themselves in the spotlight in that way. But yeah, absolutely delighted to see a bit of
you're absolutely right. We've Kezia here, so we can't not mention the fact that I'm a Celebrity is coming back, albeit differently. It's going to be in a Welsh castle. You did it, what's it, 3 years ago, Kezia? You were in the I'm a Celebrity camp. How do you look back on that?
I don't regret it. I said a lot about that at the time. The thing people often don't realise is just how cold it actually is in the jungle. It rained for the vast majority of the time that I was there, and it was very wet. So I fully expect Wales to be exactly the same, and the only difference will be in the quality of the beasties that people come up against.
And Shona, how do you see this being different?
Oh, Well, I don't know. I must confess, the first series I watched was the one that Kezia was on because, there was a little bit more interest for me there. But I was actually quite shocked at the amount of peril involved. I knew about the insects, but I didn't realise about the heights and the other things. And I just think it's not for me watching people really struggle. And is that what there's an appetite for just now? Maybe it is. Maybe people go, well, they're an even worse situation. At least I'm on my comfy sofa and I'm not in a coffin surrounded by spiders. Maybe that'll be good for national morale. I'm not sure.
I dare a sentence, Catherine, you'll be watching, I take it as well.
Oh, definitely. Just talking about peril there in the jungle. I remember being in a fairly perilous situation when Kezia returned from the jungle with the incredible scrum that sort of formed around her in Holyrood.
Well, there we'll need to leave it. Thank you all for joining us this evening.